Let's talk about love today. Sternberg talked about love as a function of three different factors: intimacy, knowing that other person; passion, more sexual feelings, or what Thumper and Bambi would have called being Twitter-pated; and commitment, so desiring to be with that person across time. And we can have one of those factors. So, for example, with liking, we have intimacy alone; with infatuation, we have passion alone; and with empty love, we have commitment alone. Or we can have two of those factors. So romantic love tends to be high in intimacy and passion and relatively low in commitment. Someone who probably many of you have been in relationships where all you could do was think about that other person, and then 3 months later, they're gone. And, the problem is, without that sense of commitment, when you hit a problem in the road, it stopped. Fatuous love is when we have passion and commitment. I have some friends who met, fell in love, got married 6 weeks later, and then 6 weeks later got divorced. And probably high in passion, high in commitment, and yet didn't know each other well. And then companionate love, where we're high in intimacy and high in commitment. Now, Sternberg talked about when we have all three factors as consummate love, where we're high in intimacy, passion, and commitment, and that this is certainly the Western cultural ideal. Across time, these three factors tend to shift. So passion tends to be extremely high when you first meet, and then 6 months later, a year later, not so much, or at least relatively lower. Commitment tends to increase up to a point and then stabilizes. And obviously, if the relationship isn't going well, it may drop. And intimacy tends to increase across time. So, if we're talking here, maybe some of your grandparents are high in commitment and intimacy and perhaps low in passion, although they may be more, passion for them may be more up here, that they're able to keep the fire alive, in each way. Now, relationships are hard, and there are a variety of different reasons why they're hard. So DeShazer talks about a number of different kinds of approaches to relationship. That about 55% of the population is here in the secure attachment. So they're able to feel pretty comfortable attached, and they tend not to want to avoid that relationship or attachments. Other people have a lot of anxiety, this preoccupied group, a lot of anxiety about relationships and relatively low attachment avoidance. So they may spend their time preoccupied and, with the other person in ways that may kind of feel creepy sometimes. There are people with low attachment anxiety, but high avoidance, that they may not see the importance of intimacy, but also not be concerned about rejection. And then there are people who are high avoidant and also high abandonment or anxiety about the attachment, who really are concerned about being burned, within that relationship. DeShazer and others have related those ideas to Mary Ainsworth's work and Bowlby's work on attachment in infants. And what they said is that, when parents are securely respond to their children and respond positively, that children are much more likely to have a positive relationship. On the other hand, if they are distant or rejecting, failing to respond to the child's needs, then when they're adults, they're likely to run into more problems. And if their parents are ambivalent, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, as adults, they're much more likely to be ambivalent in their response. So you can sort of see the relationship between this and some of Freud's psychoanalytic approach, where he's saying those early relationships lead to ways of seeing the world and ways of approaching it. I've attached in D2L a video about the strange situation task, which helps you to sort of see this, how children are responding to their parents, and how those things might set a child up for problems in later relationships. So if we're thinking about relationships from a more economic approach, one of the things that some people suggest is that the rewards have to be greater than the costs. Every relationship has costs. You're not able to have lasagna when you really want it and have to instead have pizza. That's a minor cost. And then if that outcome, you might compare that to what you think you should have. And that predicts your level of satisfaction. And let's continue this. If we have high levels of satisfaction or low, our levels of satisfaction are then compared to what other alternatives, who else is out there, and what would we have to invest into making some sort of change, and that might lead to our level of commitment. A pretty mercenary approach to relationships, but I think, if we sort of boil this down, we want the relationships to feel like they're worth it and that they're better than, the other alternatives. So I will see you next as we're talking about self-disclosure.